Good morning. I'm Sara Wyant, the founder and editor of Agri-Pulse Communications. I hope that you all are reading and viewing our content on agripulse.com. We are the nation's leading source of farm and rural policy information. This morning, it's my pleasure to be your moderator for a session that is focused on the national political outlook. It's going to be a really high-cut look at the national political scene. And a little later at your 11:45 session, you get to listen to Mike Torrey and Ray Starling talk about what some of this means in the agricultural sphere. Well, we've got a lot to cover today with Matt Lewis. I'm going to do a brief introduction of Matt, and then we're going to ask him a few questions, and then we'll have some time for you to ask questions as well. So feel free to enter those in the Q&A portion of your screen. I'm sure many of you have already heard of Matt Lewis. He's a senior contributor at the Daily Caller. He's a CNN political commentator. He's appeared on PBS, ABC, CBS Face the Nation, and he's the author of a book called Too Dumb to Fail: How the GOP Betrayed the Reagan Revolution to Win Elections and How It Can Reclaim Its Conservative Roots. He has his own podcast, Matt Lewis and the News, and he's just overall a very smart, influential, center-right critic of American politics and pop culture. And we're so pleased to have him with us here today. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, Sarah. Great to be here.
I am so fortunate to have this conversation with you. And, you know, I grew up on a farm and for a variety of reasons had this love of reading and writing and always wanted to be a journalist. How did you get inspired to be a political commentator?
Well, I grew up in a really small area. People hear of Maryland and they assume that it's like, you know, Baltimore only, but the part of Maryland I'm from is close to Pennsylvania and West Virginia. And when I was a little kid, they said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the number one answer was farmer, and the number two answer was truck driver. I wanted to play for the Baltimore Orioles. That didn't work out. But if you had a dad who was in Hagerstown, Maryland, that, you know, your son someday is going to get paid to talk about politics, he would have thought it was just as outlandish as the idea that I could play shortstop for the Orioles. So it's pretty amazing and fun to get to do what I do. And but it was sort of a long way getting there. I started off actually as someone who worked on campaigns. In fact, the last campaign I did was a star-crossed campaign in North Dakota, where I lived in Fargo for a year, and we lost that campaign. But this was around 2003, 2004, and it's when Howard Dean was running for the Democratic nomination. He ended up not winning. You know, John Kerry ended up running against George Bush. But Howard Dean started blogging on the campaign, and I did too on the campaign. That got me blogging, and it took a while for me to figure out that my calling actually wasn't working in politics per se, but writing about it. And blogging on a campaign served as a bridge that slowly allowed me to sneak my way in to being a you know, paid to talk about politics. But it took me a long time to pull it off.
Well, you've done very well. And we've got a lot of issues to talk about. Let's go back to November and recap a little bit on the 2020 elections. What surprised you the most about the outcome?
So many things have surprised me a lot in the last several years. But I think that, you know, the big story is probably COVID. I don't know if Joe Biden wins without the COVID pandemic thing. It really, you know, and again, we've got hundreds of thousands of Americans have died. I hate to solely talk about it in political terms, but it did dramatically change the dynamic of this race. I think, for one thing, it allowed Joe Biden to really play to his strengths. He was able to, he didn't have to be out there on the hustings, hustling, giving speeches and shaking everybody's hand. He was able to kind of run a more scaled back campaign, let it be about Donald Trump. And I think that Trump's handling of COVID did not help him at all. And so I guess the big surprise is, and this is actually a lesson about politics in general that I think is really interesting. People who work in politics tend to think that we can control things, right? So if you have the right candidate, you'll win. Or if you develop the right message, you're going to win. Or if you target the right voters, you'll win. But the truth is, most campaigns, or a lot of campaigns, are really determined by environmental factors that are beyond our control. And I think COVID was something I certainly didn't anticipate, a year ago. And I think that was maybe the big X factor.
Thank you for that. How do you think Trump managed to do so well with some parts of the electorate that aren't traditionally Republican voters? And I'm referring to the Hispanic voters in Florida and some parts of Texas, some of the African-American voters. I know there was outreach to those sectors by the Trump campaign, but were you surprised at all about how well he was able to do?
Yeah, I was very surprised by that. Because in some ways it defies logic, right? Especially if you watch the mainstream media. If you watch the mainstream media, there's a narrative that says, Trump says all of these racially insensitive things. So how on earth could he do well with minority voters than other Republicans in bases? There were Republicans like George W. Bush who took great pains to try to court the Hispanic community. He actually did pretty good with the Hispanic community, and by pretty good I mean he only lost like 60% of it or something like that. But he said family values don't stop at the Rio Grande. His brother Jeb was fluent in Spanish and married a Cuban American, and yet Donald Trump, somehow being the opposite of the Bushes, as opposite as you could be and still be a Republican, managed to do surprisingly well. And I don't think we really know. I mean, as you mentioned, there was an outreach effort, but why it happened, and I tell you, it was significant too, because Florida's on the East Coast, and because Florida reports early the election outcome. I remember watching on election night back in November, and when Trump won Florida and won the Hispanic vote in Florida, or didn't win the Hispanic vote, but did so well, I was like, oh my goodness, he's going to do this again. He's going to run the table again. And it turned out that Florida was an anomaly, that Florida didn't represent Arizona or Michigan or Ohio. It was kind of unique there. But, I only have theories. One theory is that Barack Obama recently, President Obama did an interview in The Atlantic where he actually made the point that there is a portion of the African-American community that would be, he talked about rap music and how, hip hop and rap music, it's about the bling, being on the yacht. And President Obama made the point that that sort of conspicuous consumption is consistent with Donald Trump's ethos. So that could be one factor. And certainly we saw Kanye West wearing his MAGA hat at points during the campaign. There's another idea that would suggest that some Hispanics may actually like, where in their country there's what's called machismo, this tough masculine leader idea, and that Trump kind of embodies that machismo more. Another point that I think is worth making is that Trump talked a lot about socialism, and in my opinion, it was sort of a stretch to accuse Joe Biden of socialism. If Bernie Sanders had won, that would be a different story. But I think it was effective. If you're coming from a place like like Cuba, for example, or Venezuela, or Nicaragua, some of these countries, and you came to America for a better life, the fear that the other party is going to move in a socialist direction, I think would resonate. So I don't have a foolproof answer to that, but I think if you add all those things up, you could start to cobble together some theories at least.
Some folks have also talked about on moral and religious grounds that some of those sectors of our population were pushing back against the Democratic message, the abortion rights and things like that. Do you have a sense that perhaps that these Hispanic voters want to have upward mobility and we're very family focused, that could be a factor as well?
Well, it could be, as you noted, I mean, I think most Hispanics tend to be Catholic. They tend to be family oriented. The only problem I would have with that theory is that it didn't really work in the past, in the sense that the Republican Party for my whole life has been about family values and about the right to life. And why didn't it work when Mitt Romney or John McCain were running? If they were worried about abortion, John McCain was pro-life. Mitt Romney maybe wasn't always pro-life, but he was pro-life in 2012 when he ran for president. So I'm not sure why it all of a sudden worked. I think it could be that Donald Trump tapped into it in a way that they didn't. But I don't think it's just the abortion issue or the family values issue, because like I said, that's been a consistent my whole life. And in fact, I would say that Donald Trump is this weird almost paradox where, I think he's the first person to speak at my wife actually sits on the board of the National Right to the March, the pro-life march in Washington, D.C. She's on the board of directors for their 501c4. And I think Trump's the first president to ever speak at that in person. So on one hand, you could argue he's the most pro-life president, in history. On the other hand, he's probably the least moral and the least church-going president, Republican in a long time. So there's this weird paradox of Donald Trump as well.
What does that mean for the GOP going forward, the implications of this in future elections? Do there need to be a more rigid outreach to different populations?
Well, absolutely. Look, I mean, demographically speaking, the Republican Party has become a party that is not exclusively, but getting there, the party of, rural, working class, white, tend to be men, tend to be non-college educated. So the problem with that, though, is, and look, I'm a white dude. My dad was a prison guard. So I don't have a problem with, country folks and working class folks at all. But the problem is, demographically speaking, it's going to be harder and harder probably to win elections if that is your coalition exclusively. And so being able to go, you don't have to win the Hispanic vote. If you get 40% of the Hispanic vote, that may be enough to make you president, right? You don't have to win the African-American vote. If you got 15 or 20% of the African-American vote, you'd probably be unbeatable as a Republican right now. So I think that it is very important for Republicans to do that. Now, the question I have is Donald Trump sui generis? Is he unique? In other words, I fear that the problem is that what works for Trump only works for Trump. It's not transferable to anybody else. So the people that Trump excited, let's say the Cuban Americans or the African Americans Trump did excite, and that did, for the first time ever, some of the African American voters maybe voted Republican for the first time ever. Will they vote if Josh Hawley is the presidential candidate in 4 years, or the Missouri senator, or Ted Cruz even? I'm not so sure. I think that Donald Trump was this larger than life figure and celebrity. And so I'm not sure that we could extrapolate that he did anything that Republicans could build on in the future.
Well, we certainly know that he's probably going to continue to be a factor in the party going forward. But let's skip a little bit into what we just witnessed this week, a very, very busy week, of course, with the inauguration. And thank God there was a peaceful transition of power, that we didn't have any of the rioting that we saw the week earlier. But we can't ignore that either. It has such a horrific image. And we had a reporter who was in the Capitol shortly before they actually broke in. My heart goes out to all those that were impacted, and certainly those who lost their lives. Did you see any of this building and coming to that effect, or, what signals did we miss, I guess, as you look at the riot on the Capitol? Well,
I have to confess, I'm not on top of alt-right and the QAnon world. Like some of my colleagues are basically focused, they're on the Reddit, 4chan, 8chan message boards, and they're paying attention to, you know, what's happening in the QAnon world and the conspiracy theories. And like, I'm not an expert on that. I can tell you that I believe that words have consequences. I'm a big believer as a writer in the power of words. And I always bet, I remember when Barack Obama gave that speech in 2008, where he said, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Don't tell words don't matter. I have a dream. Don't tell me. You know, I would even say, tear down this wall. Don't tell me words don't matter. So I believe in the power of words. And I think Donald Trump, I mean, so on January 5th, the night before the insurrection in the Capitol, or the mob, or whatever we want to call it, Donald Trump tweeted something about like, hey, watch out, Republicans who are not supporting me. There's going to be thousands of people coming to Washington, D.C. I'm paraphrasing him. I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was it was not good. And I tweeted that night on a sort of, you know, on top of his tweet, I said, this is very close to fomenting violence. That was the night before what happened on at the Capitol. So it wasn't a surprise. Donald Trump has said a lot of things that I think we could dismiss and laugh at. But if you're someone out there who really believes that they're stealing our country from us and that this is our last chance to save democracy, and then you have your president, you know, saying things that are borderline incendiary, and then keep in mind, you know, it wasn't that long ago, it was a couple months ago when there was apparently a pretty serious plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan. So in that regard, I wasn't that surprised. I was, to be honest with you, I'm probably surprised that it took this long for there to be an incident like this.
So we did see the swearing in of Joe Biden yesterday. As I mentioned, it was peaceful and he moved into the White House. We have a string of announcements, executive orders. It's a really busy day yesterday on his part. As you start to view the 46th president, you've obviously been experienced with his career in Congress prior to that. Tell us a little bit about how you think he will govern.
I think the big question is, will he govern the way he campaigned and the way that I think which is a centrist and incremental gain, or will he try to hit a home run? And so I think, you know, in other words, is it going to be swing for the fences, or is he gonna basically hit for average? And I don't think we know that yet. There's going to be pressure on Joe Biden from the left to do big things, and there's an argument that, you know, you only have the 6 months of political capital, and so you need to do something big like Obamacare. I would argue the problem with doing that is that it can poison the well going forward in terms of being able to have bipartisan agreement if you push through a big agenda that's deemed to be, you know, very progressive and very partisan. So I don't think we know yet. Is Biden going to kind of be true to himself, which is as a centrist and a moderate, or not? There is a report that he's going to try to push very quickly immigration reform. And according to the early reports, he's not going to have any border security component in it in order to entice Republicans. Now, this could totally be just, I suspect this may in fact be a negotiating ploy where Republicans get to put that in, and then that sort of seals the bipartisan deal. But I'm a little concerned that if Joe Biden tries to appease his progressive base very early and push through a sort of amnesty that doesn't include border security provisions, that would create an environment where it's very hard to have part of the future. I hope he doesn't make that mistake. I don't think he's going to make that mistake, but and certainly I think it would be wise of him to go for the elusive infrastructure week that Donald Trump was always promising. We never had our infrastructure week because we ended up doing things like a quote unquote Muslim ban and other things that poisoned the well. And of course, trying to repeal and replace Obamacare, which didn't ultimately end up happening. So that's going to be the thing. And we should know pretty soon, I would say in the first few weeks, is Biden going to govern like he campaigned? Joe Biden did something really amazing. I was skeptical that because all the energy in the Democratic Party, the excitement, the energy is actually coming from the progressive left, the Squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar. And there was immense pressure on Joe Biden to change his views on a whole lot of things. And for the most part, he did not fall prey to that. I think he was benefited by the fact that he's not on Twitter. If he was on Twitter and if he was what's called very online, I think that he would have assumed that the whole world is on Twitter and that Twitter represents the whole world, and it actually doesn't. It's a bubble. But Biden ran a really, really smart campaign, and I hope he sticks to that plan.
Yeah, it was a very closed campaign in many ways, and that journalists hardly had a chance to ask him any questions. And so there are some details to his policies that are proposed that we really don't know much about. And hopefully that will change with this pledge to have more press conferences and that sort of thing. But just circling back to immigration a little bit, this is an issue that is very, very important to the agricultural sector because of the workforce. There aren't enough people that want to work on dairy farms that are, just hanging around their downtown small community. We need to go find those. And so the President Biden has already said he wants to do big immigration reform. But I remember President Obama did too. And that was going to be one of his big high profile agendas, and it didn't go anywhere. So is there anything that makes you think that he has the momentum now, President Biden, to make this go smoother?
Well, let me just say the issue is so fraught with danger. In 2003, Barack Obama actually helped kill immigration reform, believe it or not. It's not widely known, but according to Bob Novak, he introduced a poison pill amendment that prevented Bush from doing immigration reform. But you might remember John McCain championed it. And in 2008, when McCain was running for president in the primary originally, he almost was out of the race. He ended up coming back. People forget. McCain was the front runner early on in 2008. He ended up bottoming out. He ran out of money. I think the immigration issue really hurt him with the base, and he ended up coming back basically by doing town hall meetings in New Hampshire and winning the primary. But then we had other Republican politicians like Rick Perry. This is crazy. Rick Perry and Newt Gingrich both were pushing for immigration reform and treating undocumented immigrants compassionately. And Mitt Romney attacked them both and weaponized the issue. It's hard to remember because now Mitt Romney is seen as this soft, cuddly hero of democracy, but Mitt Romney was weaponizing the immigration issue to try to win the Republican primary. Then in 2013, they had a bipartisan effort to do immigration reform that actually passed the U.S. Senate. And one of the people who really supported it, Marco Rubio, and thought it was a profile and courage for Rubio to champion it, but also a very dangerous move. And I don't know if you remember this, but there was a website, there still is, it's called Breitbart.com. And they put out this story about these quote unquote Marco phones. And the idea behind a Marco phone was, the lie was that the immigration reform bill was going to give every illegal immigrant a free cell phone. It was a lie. The truth was the phones were being provided to ranchers who needed satellite phones to report border crossings. And so Rubio was trying to do something really noble, in my opinion, and he got destroyed by the right and by this conservative media website. And so I can just tell you my own personal experience, this is on the Republican side though, has been seeing good people try to tackle this issue and get destroyed for it. So I think it is a very, and then I think Donald Trump, a lot of his support came from, Build the Wall, talking about this issue. And so it's such an emotional hot button issue. And for Joe Biden to become embroiled in that early on and to tackle that issue and make that big thing, which again, I don't know if those reports are true, but if he does, I think it's a very dangerous, it's sort of like invading a land invasion into Russia. Napoleon tried it, Hitler tried it. It's a bad idea. But then again, people said the same thing about healthcare. Harry Truman tried to do universal healthcare and didn't do it, and Obama finally did. So I think it's fraught with danger. It depends how Biden approaches it.
Thank you. It's always good to be able to look back in history about how some of these things have evolved.
Yeah, it's funny. What's funny in my business where everyone is like 22 years old, the fact that I remember what happened 10 years ago makes me a source of institutional knowledge. It's crazy.
Oh, good for you. So one of the other topics that President Biden addressed already yesterday was climate change by rejoining, rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement. There's a lot of topics. He's got kind of this high priority list moving. Climate is, of course, very important to our community that's participating in this conference because we think that agriculture can be a part of that solution. One of our sources says, it's not a matter of if, but when we're going to see major legislation on climate. Do you agree?
I think what's going to happen is not major legislation on climate. I think it's going to be every piece of legislation is going to sneak in climate legislation. So, for example, the COVID, the first thing is going to be this, huge COVID relief bill. And then we talked about an immigration bill. I would suspect that you are going to see things that have little to do, or the infrastructure bill that we talked about, that we would get bipartisan support. I suspect that rather than calling something a climate bill, that you're going to see, well, first, we've already seen the executive orders yesterday, the Paris Agreement. You're going to see administrative stuff at the EPA. But I don't think there's going to be, I could be totally wrong, this is my theory. I don't think it's going to be a big climate bill, which could be controversial and could get pushback from Republicans. I suspect you're going to see climate stuff snuck into everything. And if you add it together cumulatively, I think it will make a difference. I think it will be substantive.
Oh, that gives everybody something to keep an eye on every day moving forward here. Just a reminder to our audience, if you do have a question, please enter it in the Q&A format because I have lots of questions for Matt and I will just keep asking if I don't see any from anybody. President Biden also said during his speech yesterday that he is committed to unifying America. That was a big theme, of course. He wants to be the president for all America. And he noted that we must end this uncivil war that pits red against blue, rural against urban, conservative against liberals. How does that actually happen? I mean, you can say that, but what will you be looking for to see if he actually tries to make that happen?
Well, first I would say, I think really that is his agenda. Like, I don't think that Joe Biden actually has a mandate to do climate or to do immigration. I think he has a mandate to not be Donald Trump. I think that's what he campaigned on. I think that's what people voted for. I don't think people voted for him. I mean, some people did. I don't think most people who voted for Joe Biden voted because they wanted an immigration reform bill or a climate bill. I think he campaigned on being the opposite of Donald Trump. And what I mean by that is on the healing the country, repairing the social fabric, being a uniter, all of those things. So I think that is his big challenge. And I think it would be a mistake if he were to misread his mandate. Like if he assumes with a 50-50 Senate and a very narrow House of Representatives, if he assumes that the American public is with him on all of his agenda, his legislative agenda, I think that would be a huge mistake. What they want, what he promised, is to be a healer. Now, obviously, that's like a generational challenge. It's not the kind of, we did not get in this mess overnight. And it's the product of a whole bunch of stuff, including, I would say, technology, Twitter, things like that. But what Joe Biden can do is to cool things down. I think he can use, again, I'm a believer in the power of words. I think words matter. So I think it does matter that he's putting out this pablum, really. I mean, if you think of it, a lot of what he said during that inaugural address was just sort of the stuff where politicians always say, but this time it felt different because we haven't heard it, in so long. It felt fresh. I think that's important. So I think leading by example, providing a model, and then I would also say governing. President Obama is a very smart guy who recommend him, but he sometimes, the Twitter word is trolled. I think he trolled Republicans some. I think he enjoyed messing with Republicans. I think he even at first liked the fact that Donald Trump was getting involved because he thought it would wreak chaos on Republicans a little bit. Joe Biden needs to not do that. He needs to really not just say he's going to be the president for the whole country, but really mean it. And the amazing thing is, I think there's a chance he actually does. I think this could be, I don't want to sound too naive or exotic, because the one thing you learn in this business is never really fall in love with any politicians. But Joe Biden is kind of from a different era. And this could be, it does feel like this is kind of the moment, the man meeting the moment.
So I'd like to just ask one other question to build on that. And then I do see we have some questions coming in from the audience, so that's terrific. How does impeachment figure into the narrative about unifying the country?
It makes it so hard. It makes it so hard. I think that you could make an argument that says Biden needs to start fresh. He can't let, Trump has already dominated politics for 4 years. He can't let Trump continue to dominate politics. And to start off your presidency with the Senate in an impeachment trial, it sets the wrong tone. It goes against that brand, that goal of being a healer and a uniter. I think you could also make the argument that that before we come together as a country, there needs to be accountability, and that I think Donald Trump clearly fomented this unrest, and that he needs to be held accountable. He's kind of skated his whole life without ever really being held accountable for anything. I'm actually in that camp, to be honest with you, but I think there's a danger. There certainly is a danger that this could overtake Biden's presidency, and I think that's a real problem. I think this has to be like pulling, you pull a Band-Aid off real fast. There are some people who wanted to really rush it, who wanted to do a snap impeachment, which would have happened immediately. They would have had to change some rules around, and it would have been easy to say, that's not fair, that's not right. So they didn't do that. But this is not, this is not the kind of start that I think Joe Biden would envision for his presidency.
That's going to be really tough. So one of our questioners wants to know, when you look at the demographics of the election, obviously red state, blue state, you can see rural America overwhelmingly went for Trump. Do you foresee that Biden could do some things to reach out to rural America, try to rebuild those bonds, or will there be some political payback for those who have been so firmly entrenched with the Trump messaging?
Oh, I think there really needs to be building bridges, and I think it's incredibly important. And in some ways, it's the promise of Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden doesn't feel like a tech progressive leftist. I mean, he is, a guy from, Scranton. And I think Joe Biden can go into a diner. He can hang out with farmers and bikers and whatever, rural folk, working class people. I think Biden temperamentally can do that, and I really think he should. I thought this about the media as well. I mean, I'm not in charge of any media outlets. I have no say over anything other than what I say on TV and what I write. But if I ran a media company, I would say we have a problem. Half the country does not trust us, does not believe us. And our number one priority has to be fixing that. That's not how it works, as you know. And normally, even in politics, that hasn't been how it works. But if Joe Biden is going to heal the country and is going to bring people together, he needs to work on that. And I would say it doesn't necessarily even mean that everyone's going to vote for him. They're not. But it's kind of like I was saying, the Republicans have to do a better job if they can get 40% of the Hispanic vote. We just can't have Hispanic hate them. We don't them if you're a Republican. Well, I think the same thing's true with Democrats. You're not going to get all the rural votes or even most of them, but you can't have them thinking that you don't like them, that you don't understand them, that you hate them. And so I think that should be a top priority. I hope it is. That just because there's a lot of things for a president to do, and there's going to be a lot of people telling him, do this, do that. But even if it's just his manner and his rhetoric, I think it'll go a long way to make a difference.
Another questioner wants to ask about Secretary Vilsack, who is coming back to the Department of Agriculture to lead. And he is really a centrist appointment compared to some of the names that were really at the top of the list. You may have seen that Marcia Fudge, an Ohio Democrat who was on the House Ag Committee, was really vying for that position. She had a lot of folks in the Black Caucus pushing for her. She really wanted the position. Obviously, she ended up with a different nomination, and they brought Vilsack back after 8 years of doing the job. So it does seem like there's that part of rural outreach already. Do you have any other ideas about how folks in rural America need to do a better job of reaching out to the left and trying to make sure that there's that dialogue going on? It's not that agriculture is not willing to have the discussion with the Democrats. It's just that they really don't seem to be making those inroads.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts. I would think one thing is just, and these are some of my thoughts might even sound contradictory, but one of them is just personal relationships. Smart people in DC and come up with persuasive messages and stuff, but knowing people, and it's hard to do during COVID, but developing a personal relationship with people and also becoming a resource for them, maybe even an expert advisor to them. Easier said than done, but I think it can be done. So whenever possible, develop a personal relationship where they know who you are. They can, you've had breakfast with them or something. It's hard to hate someone if you've had a grilled cheese sandwich with them, or a cup of coffee. Knowing them as individuals. I think also, rural Americans can certainly talk about shared concerns, where with Democrats. I think there's definitely, it wasn't that long ago, right, where this was the FDR coalition, and where, you know, Bill Clinton, by the way, won half of the counties in America. I think Joe Biden got 1/6 of the counties in America. So the sort that's happened, I think, is very problematic, but it doesn't have to always be that way, because I do think that there are shared concerns about the Democratic Party was the party of the little guy. If you know, there's agribusiness, but if you're like a small farmer or something, I would think there'd be some appeal there. So the first half would be the personal relationships. The second half is actually, I don't think it's contradictory, but it may sound that way, and it is online. I've been criticizing Twitter all morning with you here because I think that it does a lot of bad things for our country, but there's amazing things that can happen. I've made friends with people that I've never met through Twitter who have influenced me, how I think, write about, talk about, and it can be done. If you follow people on Twitter, they could be prominent journalists or politicians, and you can over time develop online relationships with people where you can I don't want to say lobby, but influence them and help them understand. I can tell you, if you're a journalist and you're writing about an issue, you want to be informed about it. You want to have sources. I have people, you name what it is, what the issue is. I mean, there are people that I can call who will help me figure it out. And you can become that kind of resource, I would say, both through personal relationships and through an online presence.
That's great advice. And that's something that a lot of folks in the ag community have taken very seriously and started to do more of. And especially when they share the images of what's going on, whether it's birthing a calf or a tractor out in the field. So that's, thank you for offering that advice. One of our questioners wants to know about the future for Senator Ron Johnson, who's been a staunch advocate of President Trump, and whether or not you see that as a key race moving forward in the Senate side.
Yeah, he's up in 2 years. I think it could be a tough re-election. I'm not an expert on Wisconsin politics. However, he has been, as you noted, a staunch ally of Trump, and he has really staked out a hardline position on that. And I have to imagine that that's controversial and that there are lots of people who really can't stand him. I could just imagine that he rankles people. And I would also say I interviewed him right after he won re-election. I interviewed him at a conference in Palm Beach, Florida, right after he won re-election in 2016. And he was very angry. He had a chip on his shoulder because he felt like everybody had written him off, that he couldn't win, and he surprised everybody. And when I interviewed him, he pretty much refused to even make eye contact with me. Like, I would ask him a question, he would basically ignore me and then turn to the audience and give like a 5-minute soliloquy. And then I would so I suspect that he is not out there kissing a lot of babies, and and if you take that and then couple it with his very hardline pro-Trump stance, I mean, I would imagine that the progressives in Madison and other places will be gunning for him.
That sounds like it. Speaking of COVID, one of our questioners wanted to know about the Democratic governors that were starting to talk about opening up the economy again yesterday. You know, I hate to mention how many times I've heard that this is all going to happen right after the election, but it is a common thread that appears. What are your thoughts on that, about states starting to open up now?
Well, look, I think obviously it's a real balance. And now it's a balance that Joe Biden is tied to. Like, Joe Biden needs the economy to return. And he's going to be judged by, I mentioned whether he's heals the country, that's going to be something, but that's harder to quantify. He'll also be judged by the vaccine rollout and how he manages COVID, and it's on him now. And he's going to also be judged by the economy. And we just talked about 2 years from now, there are going to be elections. Right now, Democrats have a 50-50 Senate and a very slim majority in the House. If Joe Biden doesn't fix the economy, or if the economy's slumping in 2 years, they're going to lose the Senate and the House, which happens frequently in off-year elections anyway, right? I mean, if history is a predictor, they're going to lose that. And then good luck getting anything passed if you're Joe Biden. So long way of saying that Joe Biden has an interest now, a vested interest in getting the economy going, but he also has an interest in there not being more deaths. And so I just think this is an incredible balancing act. I'll give you just my personal opinion about it. The way that I've operated, personally is my kids go to school. They're at school right now. And I think that that's a pretty safe thing. I think it's really ridiculous that all these kids are off school right now when by and large it seems to be the teachers unions that are pushing that, but not really. The kids are by and large not susceptible to this, not nearly as much as adults. And I also think, like, just outside, like for Christmas, we drove to South Carolina so we could eat outside at restaurants, So I think the more outside, the better. I am worried that because a vaccine is now imminent and people are being vaccinated already, specifically older Americans and frontline workers, I am worried that we're going to let our foot off the pedal a little bit and say, like, it's over, and that we'll have more people die. So it's a tension, but now it's a tension that Joe Biden owns, and I think that's he needs the economy. So we'll see.
That is going to be interesting to watch. When I'm not in DC, I live in rural Missouri, and of course controlled by a Republican governor, and the state did not close down. And some of the businesses have really not only managed to survive but thrive, and so is the tax base. So
yeah,
it's really an interesting comparison. You mentioned the 50-50 split in the Senate and the fact that Kamala Harris will be a tiebreaker. What else should we be expecting from the new vice president?
Well, first of all, I would say we have to keep in mind that 50-50 split, there is a chance that we could have a surprise. It was 2001, I believe, Jim Jeffords was the governor, not the governor. Jim Jeffords was a senator from Vermont, and Republicans had a 50-50 Senate, and Dick Cheney was the tiebreaker. And then Jeffords, it is Jim Jeffords, right? I think I'm getting the guy right. It's been 20 years ago. Was lured to he became an independent, but he basically caucused with the Democrats. And so I think that one of the things that Biden and Democrats have to keep in mind is they could lose. Like, if Joe Manchin, I'm sitting in West Virginia right now, if Joe Manchin removes the Republican Party, and I think that's going to happen, or even just caucus as an independent, there goes the majority. So now, interestingly, I think there's a chance then that Lisa Murkowski, might caucus as an independent too, and throw it back to the Democrats. So it's unclear how that would play out. But I guess the point is, when it's this narrow, Joe Biden have to find a way to govern in a way that pleases everyone, basically from the AOC left to the Joe Manchin middle. And there is this thing called budget reconciliation that they can try to use. You'll remember Obama used that to parts of the Affordable Care Act. Even there, so that eliminates the filibuster, essentially. It means you just need a simple majority. Even there, you'd still need Joe Manchin, or you need to bring over Susan Collins or Mitt Romney or somebody. So I really feel like Biden has to find a way to really have a buy-in on his agenda. And again, I think it's going to have to go from the AOC left to the Manchin center, with everybody on board. And again, I think the good news for Biden is he's the right man for the job to try to do it, and B, I think Democrats are giving him a lot of latitude. For example, I think Joe Biden's cabinet, all of his cabinet picks, will all be confirmed, every single one of them. And they'll be the first president to run the table since Reagan. Like Reagan was the last guy who didn't. Usually there's at least one person, like I think Linda Chavez got pushed out for having an illegal nanny or something in the Bush administration. There's always one. Tom Daschle, I think, didn't make it with Obama, I think. Is that right? Anyway, I think Biden's going to run the table and get all of his nominees, because I think Democrats really don't want to cause him any problems right now. They just want to let Biden get his honeymoon.
So, as you mentioned, the ongoing tussle with different senators in terms of trying to pass something, I'm curious about where you see the Republican Party going with their messaging, because you've written about this in the past.
Yeah.
Trump's left the White House, but he's not going away. He may not have his Twitter account, but he's not going to go away. So what's the GOP going to look like going forward? And any of your thoughts on how they might be able to flip the House in the next cycle?
Well, first of all, I think it's a huge deal that Trump doesn't have his Twitter feed. And I have mixed views about this because, it concerns me that, look, only the government can deprive you of your First Amendment rights. So Twitter's a private company. They can do what they want. But in many ways, they've become, the marketplace of ideas or the town square. And so I don't necessarily like the idea of Twitter being able to shut down political speech. But I have to say, it's been pretty nice the last few weeks. It's been pretty quiet, and it hasn't been as crazy. I think I've been more relaxed, and I think it's a big deal that imagine if Trump yesterday were like narrating Biden's inauguration, like live tweeting. So I think that being off Twitter actually does dramatically affect Trump's ability to stay relevant and to continue to control the Republican Party as he has. Having said that, he's not going to go away. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal saying that he might want to start his own political party, like a Patriot Party. I don't think that's going to happen. I kind of wish it would, to be honest with you. I feel like if you get a divorce, it's painful, but if you get to keep the house, it's better. And so if Republicans kept their party, and I'm talking about pre-Trump Republicans like the Reagan Republicans, and if Trump started his own Trump party or a MAGA party, that would be possibly preferable. But I don't think it's going to happen. So Trump's going to always be, to some degree, involved, probably be the most significant, at least poised to be the most significant ex-president, in history, at least maybe going back to Teddy Roosevelt or something like that. So what does the Republican Party look like? I think that there are, first of all, it's going to be some hybrid. It's going to be, I think there's two options. One option is a hybrid of what I would call the pre-Trump era and the post-Trump era. So you could have someone like a Josh Hawley or a Ted Cruz or a Marco Rubio or a Mike Pence. And so these are people who were like political figures who pre-existed Donald Trump. They're going to be more populist than they would have been if Trump didn't exist, but they're also not going to be full-on Make America Great Again Trumpians. That's one option. Then I think there's another option, which would be maybe like someone like the Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, my former boss Tucker Carlson, Seb Gorka, like someone like that, like someone who really, I mean, Tucker Carlson's been famous for 25 years, but someone who really kind of became part of the Trump world and became famous, and someone who's not a traditional politician. The My Pillow guy is not a politician. Like Tucker Carlson's not a politician. And so I think those are probably the two options. You're never going to go back to Mitt Romney, I don't think. So I think it's, do you go with like sort of a normal politician that's a hybrid of the past and Trump, or do you go with like Trump 2.0, the My Pillow guy? And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm rooting for the hybrid version, but it doesn't matter what I'm rooting for because I usually don't have my way.
Well, we've just got 2 minutes left. We've covered so much territory here, and I really appreciate it. One just follow up to that. You didn't mention any women, and I'm curious about Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, Nikki Haley, or even Liz Cheney, who very publicly split with Trump. Prospects for their political future on the presidential stage.
Yeah, so Nikki Haley's very interesting. Obviously, former South Carolina governor, Trump's ambassador to the UN. She would be a hybrid candidate, definitely. And I think, though, too cute by half. In my opinion, it's too transparent what she's been trying to do lately, where she's really trying to have her cake and eat it too. She's trying to signal to Trump's fans that she's with them, but she's also trying to signal to like the intelligentsia that she's not like them. And rather than appealing to both, I fear she may be alienating both, right? So the Trump people will say, we can't trust her, she's not really one of us. And the never Trump people will say, we can't trust her because she enabled Trump, and all of his bad deeds. And so she's obviously a talented politician and has much to recommend her. My concern for her is that she has tried to have it both ways. And sometimes when you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody. So that's my take on her. Kristi Noem, I don't think is ready for prime time. I think that she could end up as the vice president, though. If sometimes you run for president like Pete Buttigieg, and you end up in the cabinet, or you end up the running mate like Kamala Harris. So I don't think she's ready to be president. I don't think she has what it takes yet. But if she tries for it, and she clearly wants to, I think Corey Lewandowski, Trump's 2016 campaign manager at one point, is advising her, the last I heard. So that's a sign that she wants to do this. I don't think she can win, but I think she could run and maybe end up, in the administration somewhere. And then, she looks, I think she's pretty young. I don't know how old she is, but for a politician, I think she probably has a few elections ahead of her. So I think she'll be okay.
Thank you for that. And I wish we could, excuse me, I wish we could all applaud and hear this rousing applause.
Nobody can throw tomatoes either. So it's a double-edged sword.
Well, it's great to have you with us here, and I really appreciate your time and the audience participation with the questions. And I'd just like to remind everyone that we're going to go to a 15-minute break after this. So long from me and from Matt, and we will look forward to visiting with all of you perhaps a little bit later. Thanks so much.